Okay, for people joining this meeting, we are talking about some enhancements to Wolfram Language related to annotating things. And let's see, we talked last time about how we're adding, what is the main wrapper that we're using for annotation? What's the main idea here? Is it annotation value or is it something different?
Annotation value would be the one to basically extract, or like right now in the current implementation we have for image audio is the one that extracts the.
Okay, so when we need, so it's then annotated.
Is
right.
And just to maybe summarize from last time, we basically were settled on having like two like tiers of annotation, like for the whole object and for parts of the object.
Right, so annotated is for parts of the object, and for the whole object, if the whole object can have annotations, there is an annotation rules option, right?
I guess that was what would embed in the object if you want to evaluate annotated, or in some other ways, like pass this annotation to the object.
Yes.
Annotation rules is one that contains the subpart annotation, while the meta information or annotation information, if you want to synchronize the names, will be the one that keeps the bigger, like the high tier association that.
Okay, so who is working towards documenting all of this stuff and so on?
Right now we are like very early. I mean, this is the design that we came up last time, but we have a prototype for audio, which is the best, the more fleshed out right now. But we were waiting to see where this design was going before actually committing to adding extra code.
Right. There are some documentation pages based on a very early audio annotation design.
Okay, but so here, just to understand, what we're planning here is, so had we settled on, okay, so functions that return annotated stuff, audio annotate, will add annotations, will attempt to add annotations to something, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And okay, so annotation value for a given interval, what it's annotating speaker, it would try to return that.
Right now, what annotation value is doing in the current design is basically like, I don't know if it's called property value for graph, is a mutable framework. So if you say
that is not true anymore. It is immutable.
Oh, okay. We change that now. Okay.
Yeah.
So
and graphs will be changed to use this stuff and to remove the property values. I mean, we'll have to keep supporting property value, but we're not going to document it going forward. Right, Charles?
Sure, as long as this one actually provides the set of functionality.
Well, make sure it does, because we want to get rid of property value, right? Because that was a bad name and we don't want to use it. It's super confusing. So tell me what that provides that you think might be a problem.
Well, I'm just seeing the design now. I'm not sure.
Haven't you been in these meetings before?
No, that's my first meeting. But at least at first glance, it's kind of roughly similar. We have an extract or something to set. We call it property value. Here is annotation.
Okay.
Right? We have a wrapper.
Annotated, which is again something where you put the wrapper that says annotated around something.
Exactly.
Right?
Yes.
Now I could imagine, and Brett, this is for you. I could imagine in graphics something could say annotated, and then something could say things that are annotated in such and such a way should be rendered in such and such a way.
Right.
Right.
I mean, I would think so. I mean, I'm with Charles. This is our first exposure to this. So.
Oh wow. Okay. Okay. Well, let's go through it more carefully then. Okay. So let's talk about. So some things are wrappers that have a place to put annotations, like image has a place to put annotations. what image doesn't have, so image, the whole outer wrapper can have an annotation information, right, which is the equivalent of the meta information stuff, right?
Okay.
Okay, so then within an image, there could be, in addition, annotation rules which say this pixel, this block of pixels, whatever it is, we can say pixel 11 to pixel 55070. That's aware, and the value is arrow, object type arrow horse, let's say. Okay, so that would be a way of annotating that image to indicate that at that pixel location is a horse. Am I making sense?
Mm-hmm.
Now, I think that
what's the difference between annotation information and annotation rules?
Annotation information refers to the whole object.
I see. Okay.
And whereas this is where and then what.
Yep.
I mean, I suppose one could have an all arrow whatever there, but I'm not sure that that's a good thing.
Also, because the meta information already contains some stuff about like EXIF tags and other things.
I know, I don't know exactly what the future of meta information is supposed to be here, but the more general thing is this annotation information.
Sure, but my point was like I don't see all those EXIF things mixing very well with this where and what structure that we plan for annotation rules.
Yes, and obviously that could have the flip around, which is the association here that says what and then the wheres.
Yeah. We were discussing this last time. I mean, I don't know if one will be strictly spared to the other.
Meta information is largely for the whole object rather than a part of the object. It's like what camera was used to take this picture and what was the settings for it. And then a little bit stores other workflow information.
Yeah, that's exactly what we're saying. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So annotation rules is inside a wrapper like image. Then there's the possibility that you could have something like 5-6 annotated expression, comma, blah, blah, blah. Okay. So that's relevant for other kinds of things.
But even text, that's a little bit challenging.
And we're going to talk about that. We're about to talk about that.
So how is annotated different from annotation?
Well, annotation is an old thing that does something slightly different. Okay, which will be deprecated.
Okay.
So annotation does that weird thing where it happens to be displaying something in the footer.
Well, it can do lots of things. It doesn't have to display things in the footer.
Yeah. Well, this is interesting. I agree. That's functionality we need. The point of annotated is that one could have something, for example, in a time series, where some part of the time series is annotated. Do you see what I'm saying? Where you want to put that wrapper in there. I mean,
it's just a convenient input form. It would never be stored that way, obviously. Makes no sense.
Yeah, I understand it. When it says, when possible, it shows itself to the container on evaluation.
Well, okay. It will be stripped in parsing rather than sewing.
Whatever, however you want to do it. So the question is whether annotated so I mean an alternative here, what a mess. What does the default do? What does the default annotation do? Do you know?
Nothing.
So it just sits there.
It just sits there. I mean, it's, it just displays thing.
Well, we could use the same wrapper probably because this annotated has, by the way, we got a bunch of background noise, please. We probably could use the same wrapper now that I'm looking at it. Because the third argument, saying what to do with the annotation, that would actually fit in just fine. Because it could say, what is regions for rasterize, export, etc.? What does that mean?
That is to facilitate image maps.
So for example, if you have a scene, with a bunch of disks, and you take one of the disks and you wrap annotation, whatever region around it,
and then you export it,
you can get the pixel position of the disk.
Well, but that's not, to make an image map, well, I'm not quite sure what that...
I'm fairly certain this was tied into HTML export in some way.
Yes, that's what I think too.
I don't remember the details, but that was the idea though.
Right, but so this isn't completely stupid, even with annotated, and then a third argument here, which says, tooltip, for example, hyperlink for exported image maps. Huh. Okay, but one could imagine something where the third argument here says how to indicate the annotated thing for display purposes. And normally it wouldn't be indicated for display purposes. It would just sit there for semantic purposes and not have a display representation. Am I making sense?
So, in most compound objects, that makes no sense.
What do you mean?
Like time series, it makes no sense whatsoever.
And what makes no sense?
That one data value is annotated with a hyperlink. Makes no sense.
Wait. No, that's not correct. If you have a time series, okay, and
makes
one
no
data
sense.
value. Wait. Let's take the case of audio, okay? We perfectly well know that we want to annotate audio in intervals, at least to say that's speaker 1, speaker 2, and so on, right?
Mm-hmm.
So with time series, and we talked about this at the end of last time, the relationship between discrete and continuous annotation. Okay, so for example, in a time series, it could be, rocket was launched here in the time series. Am I making sense?
Sure. But it wouldn't do an actual hyperlink. There's no, where the hell do you point to get the hyperlink?
No, I get it. But look, the fact is, well, it might or might not. Who knows? It could say something like this. It could say, whatever the rocket launch, data is, time value. And then it could say, HTTP, rocketlaunch.com or something. Okay. And then it could say hyperlink. And if we wanted it to, that would mean, I'm not sure what that, I don't know what it would mean to look. These things seem like they have been grandfathered for particular. They're being used for multiple purposes, and this documentation seems completely inadequate. Yeah, I don't understand why there isn't more documentation here. There's nothing here. This is kind of lame. Okay, we need to know what this actually does. So let's look rasterize. Maybe that has a comment about what's going on here. Okay, regions, possible basic elements that can be returned by rasterize include. Okay, so that's a weird thing. John, do you understand this?
No, but I can try digging into it a bit.
Would you like an example, Stephen?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, I see it down here. Look, rasterize gives a list of rules of the form associated with an annotation. Okay. That's really funky. I mean, this is so. Go ahead, give me an example.
Well, I mean, there might be one further down, which is probably easier than typing, but. There's.
That's really funky.
So it gives bounding boxes.
Mm-hmm. In the pixel coordinates of the rasterized graphic.
Okay. All right. So look, there's some uses here that we need to understand, but fundamentally, whether it's called annotated or annotation, and it's possible that we might want to rename it annotated, and basically deprecate annotation, taking over its functionality with annotated. But the main thing for annotated is that we want to give this, key value list, right, of what and value. Am I making sense? Yeah? Yes, people understand? No, they don't understand?
I mean, for annotated, the what is the first argument, right?
No, look at what it says here. No. What this means is annotated, and you can give some, expert, comma, and then here it says speaker, arrow, Bob or something. You get what I'm saying? Arrow, emotion, state. This would be for audio. Arrow, happy. Get what I'm saying?
I think so. So the
right?
correspondence
it's a key
here.
value pair. Right?
So the correspondence between annotation and annotation rules is that annotated, that expert essentially serves as where for the annotation.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. This is specifying it by symbolic structure, as opposed to specifying it by giving the position, so to speak.
Gotcha.
Okay. Okay, so there are these two cases, but those cases I want to emphasize are work only for things where you can insert this stuff. So as Roger pointed out, so for example, for an image, you can't get inside the image to do this, right? If your data is represented as a list, you could get inside the data and do this. Get what I'm saying? Whereas for an image, you're not going to break the image apart and say, there's no way to wrap around those particular pixels with something. So instead, you have to refer to it indirectly by saying, this region in the picture does this. That make sense?
Yes.
Okay, so now let's consider the case of strings. Okay?
Was that Shadi?
That was Shadi, yes.
Yes. Hi.
Hi.
Shadi was away for...
Yes.
But is now back. Good. Or is not, or is on the other side of the...
No, I'm back. I'm back as of yesterday.
Okay, terrific.
Congratulations.
I made it.
Okay. So let's talk about strings, right? Again, so what we considered here, which is perhaps crazy, is the possibility of exploding a string into something like this to be able to annotate it. Alternatively, Yeah, I mean, that seems hopeless, actually.
Why?
I think
that seems like a really good idea to me. It already has a head, for God's sake.
Yes.
I mean, it's no entry. That's okay. Just can still query.
Well, can we comment on this? Then is this thing string queue, for example? And what would happen if you said string take?
Yeah, that's the real problem, is that you have all kinds of functions which expect to be able to work on strings and fundamentally assume that a string is nothing more and nothing less than an array of characters.
Yeah, so we might have to create, just for that reason, that there need to be sort of a hyperstring or something.
Yeah.
So, I had a concept of something that is like a better linear syntax that involves markup that lives, inside a string, but is fundamentally still stringish. It's not one that I've floated generally and may have some controversy to it, but it's an idea that I've been kind of, tumbling around for a little while now.
So wait a minute. I mean, linear syntax.
But there are other kinds of things that people want too, like the machine learning people want to annotate strings with.
Let's give the example here.
Entities.
Of I think this was Jerome's thing, where he's annotating, and this is very complicated because this has a lot of overlapping annotation. Right. In fact, the only way this annotation can reasonably be represented, I think, is by giving a kind of offline, this range to this range.
Right. So it's the very same as for audio.
Yes, but notice that this type of in expression annotation can only work hierarchically. You can't have disjoint selections there.
Yeah, so it's a limitation of that.
Right. So that's but the idea that we had previously is that's a convenience when you can use it.
Sure.
When you can't, just use the annotation rules to indicate where the thing should be. So in a sense, and this would, again, for strings, I mean, I'm skeptical about, okay, so question for John. So, I mean, the problem with linear syntax right now, and for those who want to know what we mean by this, I mean, so if we say this, and we say control, gosh, it's been so long since I did this, control equals, let's say, x cubed, I don't know what I typed here.
You're not using that often.
I'm not using this very often, no. It's a magnificent feature that
I was going to say that's a good thing that he's not using this that often.
Why?
Well, it's just because of all the problems that linear syntax,
No, I wasn't referring to that. It's not using the superscript and subscript.
Right. Okay. So now, what is this string? Splarf. Okay. Now the problem is, if I take that string, line 2, and I say string take %2, 10, for example, what am I going to get?
So, I mean, you'll get something that it corrupts the structure, but it doesn't break string take.
Yes, I understand.
And I think there's some merit to that.
Okay, so let's talk about, by the way, why on earth is this indicating as a syntax error? Oh, because it is. Oh my gosh, what a horrifying thing. Because that string is no longer a syntactically usable string.
I'm not 100% certain if that's... I'm not for sure if that might not be
truly
a bug.
Confusing.
That might be a bug. I mean, okay. I don't know.
Okay. But let's talk for a minute about linear syntax, okay? the real question is this a string? I mean, what could we possibly do? Okay, so let's talk about some things that we could do. I mean, string take. What is string take supposed to do on a thing like this? It seems quite hopeless.
I think it kind of has to do exactly what it does.
Yeah, well, and in fact, people actually do this right now, in doing horrible, awful things that would make you go, running for the hills screaming. But they do it in order to accomplish real ends.
Yeah, but so the question is there a more elegant way to handle this stuff? I mean, because what we've got here is an escape inside the string, and then that string happens to be...
With linear syntax, it's actually, it's very difficult in the form that it's in right now for it to be elegant, because linear syntax is... the parsing gets much, much worse than what you're seeing here. This looks like straightforward and you could kind of figure it out, but you're not even close to the worst case scenario here.
Well, okay, be that as it may, I'm asking the question, 20 something years later, would we have done linear syntax differently?
Well,
I mean, is that what boxes are for?
No.
Well, so the I mean, in answer to Brett's question, this is a fundamental problem, is that for most things, boxes in the front end are directly analogous to boxes which are sent over the link to the kernel. But this completely not. We have to have this parser for this form, between, something that's sent to the kernel as a string and boxes. And for the front end, it would be...
But so for that scenario, it's really like we say, it's a linearization. It's a streaming format to get that information over. The sort of a packed format for it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, for the front end, it would be easier if we just dealt with everything as boxes. All of this typesetting stuff inside of strings, but then the only possible, results would be either that we just, foist the problem onto the kernel of linearizing it, or we give up on linearizing it and we break string take and friends.
Okay, so actually there's a number of interesting comments on our live stream here. The most recent one of which is, why isn't the stuff inside \xclam treated as a single character? So let's examine that question for a second, okay? In the world where we had only 2-byte characters in strings, that was clearly not sensible, because it's kind of, it breaks the information theory, so to speak. We're trying to stuff a large amount of information into a single character. But in the modern world, where strings can have multi-byte characters, why is that so obviously stupid? So in other words, imagine that what happened is, for purposes of string take, that thing is just a lump. It's just a single character lump. It happens to be, it's not a 4-byte character, it's an 82-byte character, but it's just one character. What is wrong with that idea?
Well, I mean, of course, the first issue is that it's something that has to be implemented fundamentally in kernel strings, and I'm not sure what the consequences of doing that are. They could be quite dramatic.
In what sense? I mean, but semantically, it seems like that seems like a quite sensible suggestion.
Well, I mean, so how is a function like string take implemented in the kernel? The kind of structure you're talking about is no longer a simple array of characters.
Well, but okay. So my question is this: when you have a 4-byte character, I don't know what it looks like internally. When you have a string that is mostly 1-byte characters, and then suddenly there's a piece of Babylonian cuneiform in there that's 4.
Well, right now in nightly builds, right now everything is a single 32-bit. Each character is a single 32-bit value. A string in the kernel is a list of basically 32-bit integers representing characters.
We didn't just quadruple the size of every string, did we?
They were 16-bit before, but yes, some things got larger.
That's not nice. So in other words, there's no mixed string. There's nothing where there's an 8-bit character humph.
That's now I'm not the one who implemented it, and I'm not the kernel expert, but my understanding from the people who did is yes, that's the way it is.
So it's a packed form.
Well, what's packed about it? Wait a minute. Does 11.3 have the new string stuff in it?
No,
It's
no.
packed. You said it's an array of 30. Yeah, it's an array, so it's packed. And they.
But Stephen's complaint is that it's packed with a larger data type.
Okay, so the byte count there is 32. So let's go look at. Can I look in the head branch build, or should I look in the prototype?
Yes. It's been in the head branch for months. So yeah.
Okay, so let's take a look here. Wake up. I'm not getting used to this thing being at the top. Do you really want it at the top, John?
Oh, sorry. I'm not sure. There are difficulties. Let's not discuss it here, but there are difficulties.
Okay. And you are going to get rid of the stupid period at the end there.
Oh, is there a period?
It's 150 period%.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Well, magnificently, that's still 32 bytes. Wait a minute. Is that what I would expect? Hold on a second. So if I say string join of the alphabet or something, and I say byte count of that, I would expect it is. Okay, now what's it going to do here? Now, if I go, okay, well, that's all a good sign. So let's say I say here Greek alphabet, 80 characters. Okay, great. Magnificent. So let's say I say here, okay, well, this is all good. Now, how do I get to a character? Anybody know the Unicode for some weird emoji? Can I get a weird emoji?
Sorry. It's one. I'm trying to remember the.
Can I get to an emoji on my Mac keyboard?
No, and you won't be able to see it in any case on the Macintosh.
Okay, fine. But how would I? So if I simply say from character code.
It's hex 01F600 is smiley.
01 F600.
But you won't be able to see it on Mac though.
Okay, fine.
It'll look like two unknown or two weird glyphs.
Why two weird glyphs? Oh, because the formatting isn't done yet.
Because of the lack of front end support.
Okay, but so that is a string, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so if I say characters of that string, I will see it. Oh. What on earth just?
Oh no! That's something went terribly wrong there. That should not happen.
Okay, so it died somehow.
Yeah, the kernel died. I will follow up on that.
It died, so we couldn't really tell. Did it die or did it? Who knows what happened there?
Yeah, see the in-out label.
Yeah, I see it.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, the good news here is that these things are not any bigger, so that's great. Although we don't know how that's achieved.
Right.
The bad news is this thing seems to be completely dead on arrival. But I think we should. I mean, semantically, this seems like an interesting suggestion to treat anything which isn't a I mean, I have no idea what is involved in the way that this, I mean, clearly we have to know something about this implementation, but semantically, if the extra weird stuff in the string was treated as a single character, that would work for everything. I mean, it would work for string take, it would make sensible semantics for string take, etc. Right? And the only thing we wouldn't have there is we would need a separate function to basically boxify. Well, how would we boxify? Yeah, to basically turn into boxes that thing. We need a function that goes backwards and forwards between the single composite character and the boxes that stand for that single character stands for, right?
Yeah. Well, we'd have to invent an entirely new notion of string boxes.
Right. Well, anyway, this is the least silly suggestion that I've heard for how to, because if we did that, then all of this writing out, well, okay, so then how does it serialize? That's the next question. So it could serialize the exact same way it serializes today, right? It's just semantically character by character, it would be something different, although that unfortunately might be an incompatible change.
Well, I don't understand if the main purpose of this form is to serialize boxes and notebook expressions. Why don't we just assign the correct serialization form for it and not let it mix with strings?
Serialize what? I mean, but the string, look, within a string, you can have an inline cell. Right? That's what this is. The thing I just created here is, I mean, even if I'm doing something very basic, I'm saying
But it reminds me, I'm guessing for version 3 or whenever this was introduced, I'm guessing that was introduced as a bridge because some functions were not prepared for anything but strings, like messages or some such.
Yeah, but there are all kinds of cases where you want to deal with strings. I mean, among other things, you want to deal with strings for things which are not, syntactic input of any form.
Right.
But you need to hold that representation in some way. And the
you could hold it as boxes.
Strings are to work directly with the boxes, which then introduces its own set of confusions if you're doing that in your code.
Well, I mean, but to be fair, there are things like subscript, for example, which are just fine. You can do that in your code without any trouble.
Yeah.
Well, let's roll back just a minute. Let's think about this again for a second. So when was this introduced? This was introduced in version 3, right?
That's right.
So that's like mid-90s?
1996.
Oh, yeah, I knew that. It's always easy to remember. My oldest child was 1 year old at the time.
August of 96.
Right. Okay. So, and remind me, John, why did we introduce linear syntax?
Well, so, I mean, okay. Ultimately, it comes down to this. In the front end, when you have a typesetting editor, we feel that it's important that you should be able to type anything. Okay. Now, obviously, not anything that you type is going to evaluate. We need to be able to represent it in boxes, but not everything you type is going to evaluate. But then the question is, should you impose some kind of artificial limitation around strings? You could, but that actually denies a lot of fairly useful sorts of behaviors. You want to kind of piece together, bits of, typesetting things that, using, and, pass them around, as not evaluated expressions, but just as, something that draws.
But wait a minute. I mean, we've always got the possibility. I mean, if we have something like this, right, then that thing.
Okay. I mean, simple case. You want to do radical of X.
Yeah.
You want to pass. Do you want to do square root of unevaluated of x. Just put it in a string of radical of x.
All right, string. What are you telling me?
Square root 2 of x, or string of, sorry, control 2 of x.
A string of control 2 of x.
Yes. By being in a string, you don't ever have to worry about what's going to happen with that x. It didn't create a symbol. It didn't, it won't evaluate. It is what it is. It will never change.
Yeah, I understand. I mean, it's a way of taking an expression. I mean, look, we could have instead had a thing called quote. We do. We have a thing called hold, right? I mean, if I say that.
Yeah, I mean, one could have done this with hold form. I don't remember if we had hold form in version 2.
We did. Yeah, we did. But I don't think that I don't think this was the only point. I think there were a lot of cases where you had to go back and forth. What was the point here? Well, okay, let's come back to our current issue. I do think we should re-examine linear syntax some more. And I think,
I mean, there are cases that, that deal with strings exclusively. I mean, you did mention messages. That is definitely one of them.
Yeah, I mean, that's a historical.
And we live with that legacy to this very day.
Yes. I mean, the thing is, there are things which operate at a low level just on strings. And I understand that, by the time it's, okay, let's come back to our main issue for right now, which is annotation of strings. Okay? So, I think string annotation is a fairly special case. He says. I mean,
well, is string annotation fundamentally different from bitmap annotation or sound annotation? I mean,
no.
You can
not really. I mean,
the only same sorts of things in terms of applying positional information from the outside.
Yeah, that's correct. The only difference is that the image wrapper. If I have a little tiny image.
But to me, it seems like a waste to create just annotated string. I think there should be a more capable object than just, it seems like a waste of symbols. Because then, you can build a richer string interface if you build the current string is like raw string. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I mean, I'm trying to figure out if, for example, are there different kinds of annotated strings which deserve their own head, or should it be more general than that? I mean, like, is a spoken language string different from a genetic data string or something?
Yeah, well, the fact that we represent genome stuff, I mean, the fact that we're saying whatever it is, wow, what are those? That's really weird.
So we treat those the same as English then? Because the strings are strings.
We do. Yes, we do.
Yeah.
I mean, this thing, well, that wasn't very exciting. Let's pick, who knows a small gene? I think this. Anyway, whatever. Okay. So, I mean, that for us is just it's just like English.
Yeah.
Right? And we can say string take and all the usual things. Now, obviously, we would like to be able to annotate that and say, this is the such and such region of that gene.
Mm-hmm.
We want that annotation. We could want two different things to happen. We could want it to be the case that when you do string take, you carry the annotation along. I mean,
but there are other things that are useful for a higher level string. It could have some display effects. So the string gets displayed with different colors or...
Well, right, but that's what's going on here, right? This annotation here of the string, which is...
Right, you could change, you can make it thicker or something, like bold or something.
Right, well, there's highlighting,
underline,
highlighting and so on. Yes.
Right, but if that's carried with the object, then it's always there.
Yes, but then what does string take do? Does it drop it or does it not?
Yeah,
does it ignore it?
It should probably drop it.
Well, but that's probably not what you want some of the time, because
That's
some of
true.
the time what you want is,
So you might want it to follow along, but that's what we talked about for annotations too, that, or properties for graphs. How can you make them follow along when you have an operation that produces a new object of the same type?
Yeah, I mean, you could define an algebra of string operations that that functions on the annotation data.
sure. Right. And so the question would be, if you do a string take, let's say you've annotated a particular block of characters.
So string take for this would be a more sophisticated, it would, in particular, it would use, part of it would be the old raw string take that we have. And part of it, when it gets this kind of object, it needs to do a more sophisticated operation.
Yeah, but right. But so let's take an example to see what it would do. So let's say one has annotated a range of characters in a string to be, I don't know, indicated that it's a noun phrase or something, right? And then you do a raw string take to character number 11, which bites off part of the noun phrase and not the rest of the noun phrase. What do you then do with the noun phrase?
I think that the annotation has to, we have to know whether the annotation in that case is atomic or not.
I see what you're saying.
And that becomes part of the algebra I was talking about.
I see. So
other useful things that a higher level string could do, it could elide, it could auto elide. You could specify how much to elide. So you don't get this many page string, for instance.
All right. So this is the notion of a higher level string, or a wrapped string, so to speak. Okay, so is an annotation atomic, i.e., if only part of it is taken? Okay, I'll give you another example of something ugly. Should the annotation drop off? Okay, so here's another case. Is the annotation unique? As in, what does it do? So if you copy that part of the string, does the annotation repeat? See what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So that would be, like for instance, I don't know, sort of first noun. Well, you don't want first noun to go repeat if you repeat the string. So, okay, so another thing you've mentioned is auto-elision. Okay, but so
there might also be some cases where, like in the text case, I'm having a bit of difficulty figuring out exactly how to express this, but like in the text case, you diagram a sentence, and so this is the subject, but you take the word out, you've still taken the whole word out, but it's not in a sentence anymore, so it can't be a subject.
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
It could still be a noun, but it can't be a subject.
Then there's things like string replace and stuff like that, which I think are even more less defined, this kind of thing.
Right. Someone on our live stream is asking why the list of string A, string B can't be equal to the concatenated string, because they mean something different. Imagine that I wanted the words in this sentence. I might want to do something with the words in the sentence, and that's different from having the sentence itself. But okay. So then the next case here was a word in a sentence in situ could be a subject, but when extracted can't be. But again, that could be a mess, because when extracted too far, it can't be. But if the whole
but
sentence,
if you extracted the sentence from a paragraph, maybe it still is. Yeah.
okay.
Also, there is nothing that guarantees that the annotations are about the text structure. They could be literally whatever thing the user thinks of.
I'm sorry, what do you mean? So you mean in the string?
I don't think we have discussed any restriction to the content of the annotation.
No, I understand, but it could also be that this word is said with emphasis or something.
Yes.
And then it's very, very unclear.
Blue.
What's that?
Or just the color blue. That could be a valid annotation.
Well, I think we want annotations that say key value, so to speak. So,
okay. Yeah.
But what you're saying here is there is a notion, as John is saying, there's an algebra of annotations, basically. Is that something that will be true of expressions as well? We have the same issue, right? I mean, it's there's nothing special about a string versus a
except that expressions are, they already have an algebra because we have a full expression manipulation language. So that's...
I understand, but one could imagine annotations that sit, where the list manipulation... Okay, so look, there could be annotations of strings versus annotations of lists. We could equally well have whatever the annotator is, whatever, let's just imagine that we said annotated of a string, comma, and then we broke what I was saying before, which isn't very good, but yeah, I mean, and then we had a where, arrow, what, a sequence of where, arrow, what type things. We could imagine doing the exact same thing with a list, right? I'm not sure how useful that would be, but where we've got the list elements there, and then we potentially got operations. So if we defined, I mean, again, I'm not certain what we want to do here, but we could define a take operation that would take on annotated with a certain algebra of how that works.
Well, so this was, I'm not sure if I understood Roger correctly earlier or not, but it kind of sounded like there were some cases where Roger was concerned about, that you do have a list, but violating the integrity of that is expensive or undesirable for some reason.
Yes and no, but it wasn't that big of, I think that, was it when we talked about the annotation you're referring to?
I think maybe time series.
Yeah, you don't want to monkey with the packed array, basically, by putting something like that in the middle.
Yeah, but it also makes no sense because you can't point to that individual point. It's not there. There's nothing. That's why I was referring.
That's what you're saying. You're saying in a time series, you have certain control points, basically, but there could be a point where something exciting happened, but that point is not actually explicitly represented in the input data.
Well, it could be that too, but then you wouldn't have marked it up with your discrete annotated thing to begin with.
You could have done. It might have been the case that the thing has a time series where, just linear interpolation is being done. The temperature is rising, whatever, 1 degree per minute or something, and at some moment you want to annotate the fact that it passed the boiling point of lead or whatever.
Sure, but that wouldn't use annotated. It would use the options where.
No, I agree. It would use the options. I agree. Right.
Okay.
Right. So, if it isn't there, you can't wrap annotated around it.
Exactly.
Yes. Right. And yeah, so I mean, the question someone on the live stream is asking about plotting when there are annotations. Yes, I mean, one wants ways to display annotations and to have options for how the annotations of different kinds could be displayed. But I think the problem we're trying to solve right here, I think
so. We can take just to make it concrete. So we haven't come as far yet with audio, but right now the audio plot and so on functions do display where the annotations are. Over time, one could imagine having.
How do I see that? If I say audio capture here,
that should be in the prototype.
Okay, let me see. I want to see this.
Okay, Let me then talk about another case, which is much farther developed, which is graphs and meshes. Now, the vertex color, the vertex shape, the vertex label are all properties. They're standard properties that we support, and there's more. There are weights, there are capacities. These are standard things that we system-wide support. Everything else is user extensible, and those are displayed.
Weights are displayed? How are weights displayed?
Weights are not displayed, but the color and the shape and so on, they are displayed.
But by the way, does somebody know the prototype build seems to be, is the prototype build broken, or is the prototype build just not package, scope, make, interpreter, object? Anybody recognize that? Well, anyway.
It's
Wasn't that a couple of weeks ago?
I don't know. I think this is a modern build. It better be a modern build.
Yeah, it's not fatal, though. It will break some syntax coloring stuff, but it's not fatal.
Okay, fine. Okay, so now I say audio capture.
Okay, still that is.
Hello, hello, hello.
So now you want to annotate it somehow? So you say...
Well, let's first of all say audio plot. What does that do? Okay, so that does that. Right. Okay, now how do I annotate it?
You might want to say audio annotate of out2, and maybe audible, the string audible. That should do something theoretically. Let's see. Okay, and now audio plot of that, comma annotations goes to audible. The how to select which ones is still not.
Like this?
I think so. Yeah, that should be the current state.
Interesting. Okay.
And nothing is final. It's just something to like play on and see if these annotations are useful or not, essentially.
All right. So that was, so the bottom area of the audio plot is showing the annotation, and it could say, you know, my name or something there if it recognized my voice or whatever.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
And you could imagine more things that automatically use these. So for instance, we could have an extended player in the future which allows you to do karaoke, right? It tells you what to sing. Or it's transcribed a speech. So you see
it's just amazing that we can have a whole technology stack, and in the end we make a karaoke machine.
That's right.
Okay, fine.
What else would you do?
Okay, so...
But it'll be the world's first symbolic karaoke machine.
We're going to be singing math formulas.
Yeah, right. We have that, right? We have all kinds of... Don't we have a spoken string thing for
Yes.
So one use of annotations in the audio domain is just to stir information about the signal in the same object. This is how they have been used in the wild, rather than for actual computation on the signal.
And there's a bunch of sort of very technical things like linguists. They like to store phonemes and other things to use for training data and other stuff.
Right. But let's come back to this case and understand how it maps into what we've talked about here. Okay. So audio annotate is adding conceptually things like annotation rules into the audio object.
Exactly. The format of the data is slightly different, but it's the same kind of information. It's exactly that.
So now the exposure of that through audio plot is a case we have not discussed. So we discussed annotation value so annotation value here would be potentially a way of that.
That is implemented. That should work.
Oh, what should it do?
Return the data structure.
Cool. Okay.
And it has several utilities. The second argument is the one that you asked for the selection, where you can ask for an interval. But you can also have a pure function as a criterion, like return all the information, all the annotation that satisfy this criterion, and it's kind of arbitrary. You could ask slot time more than something, or slot whatever, And
Okay,
that
but
that's
this is, by the way, I'm not a huge fan of this. I don't quite understand why this isn't a time interval.
Yeah, no, so this is equivalent to it. As I said, the data structure is different, the information is the same.
Okay.
So the only thing is that this allows them to have one uniform way for zero duration, which is an event, to positive duration, which is an interval.
Fair enough.
And if you add, if your annotation value of outfer comma all comma interval, that gets formatted as intervals.
Like this?
I think all, or full might work as well, actually. An interval as a string, I think. Yeah, that should do it, hopefully.
Should I change that to a string?
No. There is something wrong. Anyways, the third argument does the formatting if you want to whatever. There is some issue with that.
Determines how the thing is returned, whether it's returned as an association or as a graphic or something.
Yeah, or a time series, for example.
Yeah, okay. All right, but let's look at the case we have not considered, is this case here, which says what to do with the annotations in, for example, a plot. Right? So that's a case we haven't discussed in our annotation value. So I think the correct thing for that would be something like, I'm going to, okay, so we might, it specifies, well, yes, or we could also have annotation style.
By the way, that is already implemented, so you can apply different styling to in audio plot.
How? How do you say?
You go annotation style goes to red, for example. That applies the style to the plot of the annotation. It's just convenient stuff. It's not. We haven't discussed the design of these things. So, but just so you know, there should be something that.
Well, percent is nothing. %4, I think.
No.
Yeah, %4. Rather than percent in audio plot. Should
okay, there we go.
Do it.
Okay, magnificent. All right, but so then the question is annotation options or annotation style. I think annotation style is the right thing for plotting, given that the thing you're plotting has annotations in it. Annotation style to none, annotation style is so we have various comments on our live stream here. Let me just take a look at these. So Ethan Black 86 is pointing out, I think the best way to think about annotations is in the context of expressing arbitrary metadata on samples in some training data set.
That's one use case.
Yes. Let's see, mapping samples to labels. I see. What you're saying is, instead of in a training set, what you could do is you could say, here are 5 pictures, 3 are of cats, 2 are of dogs, where you represent that by saying, picture arrow cat, picture arrow dog, right? The alternative would be that you could say that the picture itself was annotated with the label.
Right, but you could also have a picture with many things in it, so you don't know.
Sure, absolutely, but
where is the cat? Where is the dog?
Okay, the good point that's being made, in my view, is that for the machine learning folk, there is what am I trying to say? Sorry, I sent to for the machine learning folk, they probably want the things like classify to work directly on things that just have annotations that don't have labeling. Am I making sense? So that's another place where you're exposing. It's a place where you're using annotations, right? Where you're training on the annotations rather than training on labels. Did that make sense?
What do you mean by label?
So what I mean is normally when you say classify, right? It looks like this. You say picture, some picture arrow cat, some picture arrow dog, right? But the alternative would be that within the picture is an annotation that says this is a picture,
Oh, I see.
For example, annotation information.
So I see what you're saying. Okay.
The alternative here would be annotation, that within that picture, so let's imagine it was an image, and it could say annotation information arrow cat. And all it is annotated images, right?
Right.
There's no explicit value. That's a really good point. I mean, that should be used as that it should be possible to do that. Let's see, who is project managing here? Don't tell me this.
It's me, Stephen.
Okay, slightly off your usual beat, but still. That's something we should point out to Etienne and friends.
Okay, will do.
Somebody's pointing out this thing called audio set. Do we know about audio set?
Yes.
Yep.
It's used for audio identify.
Oh, so that's, by the way, does audio identify work?
Yes.
Okay, I have to just try this. Sorry. I haven't ever tried this before. Let's do this. Oops. It's going to say fake cough. Or it's going to say nothing.
The problem is that the set of labels is, wow, okay. That might have some issues for, I'll check that out. The problem is that the set of labels that are available in audio set is very limited. So it will not have something as specific as cough.
I see.
See what I'm saying? The set of labels is 500 versus 5,000 for image identify.
Right. Okay, in any case, but back to this point that we need a way. So in the case of graphics, we're saying pull out the annotation and use it in such and such a way, right? Use it to, display it in such and such a way. Display it as a tooltip. Display it as a red box or something. Similarly, in the case of machine learning, we have to say pull out the annotation and use it to give, for example, the labels. So that's another issue is right, for graphics labeling or machine learning, etc. Okay.
I think we're in just the beginning of all the potential workflows with this.
Well, fair enough, but that comes back. Okay, so let's go back.
So quick question. Something you said just triggered this. So for that classify example, how does it know that the cat inside the annotation information for that picture is an object and not the camera type or whatever that's...
Well, exactly. That's why I'm saying you need to be able to say what you're going to use. That is, classify would otherwise be learning. It's like when the perceptron learnt that it was that there was a tank during the day type thing. Right? It's learning the wrong thing.
Although it would be really cool to have image identify what camera took photos.
Yes, but the whole point is that what we want to do here is to say in the classify thing, we want to be able to have a wrapper that effectively causes this to turn into something like this, right? That somehow, it's like annotation value, but it unscrambles. It somehow unscrambles the annotated thing, but essentially surfaces, annotations to use for some other purpose.
So can I give you one example? So I was thinking of a similar thing. For example, if you have an audio object that's annotated and you want to just plot the annotation. And I was wondering if it was possible to teach, for example, list line plot, to take an audio object and extract the annotation and do the correct thing. Turns out that that's a fairly complicated.
Yeah, it's fairly crazy. I think that's fairly crazy.
And a bit crazy. So the workaround seemed sensible to my mind was to give the third argument to annotation value that allows you to format the output in whatever way you prefer.
I would prefer to have it generate some intermediate symbolic form that can then be consumed by list line plot and other things.
That's exactly what he said.
Yeah, I mean, it's not.
That's what he said. You know, it just helps with the wrangling. That
yes.
It's several standard ways of outputting it.
But it's not just symbolic; it does evaluate to that.
Yes, symbolic in the sense that the thing it evaluates to is a symbolic object. But yeah, okay, I get it. Okay, so let's zoom out for a second and talk about strings again. Let's see. Somebody is asking, could you annotate different dimensions of your object? For example, for audio, if I wants to annotate the region that's louder than some threshold. Yeah, that's the whole idea of this being a bunch of key value pairs.
Yeah, exactly.
And associations of the classes would be keys. Yeah. That's correct. Okay, so the suggestion there is because this is that's a reasonable suggestion that because this thing is normally in the form of an association, what one could do here. Okay, so this is a way to do this. I agree. So this is if we said this, and then the whole shebang were to say arrow class, I think that might be consistent with the whole, might conceivably be consistent with the whole structure of what classify can take, to have that then extract that key value from the annotation information of all those images.
I was thinking about this, Stephen, but this is it looks like a little fragile to me. I'm not sure if.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. Maybe that the right thing to do is, I mean, so alternative would be something like, I don't know. See, it's got to have some way to pull this out. It's got to be some wrapper that pulls this out. Annotation.
Maybe one thing I was discussing with Carlo is to keep annotation value unevaluated for certain input. But at that point, like we weren't contemplating strings.
I don't think that's gonna fly, because I think that's going to be confusing.
That's really fragile.
Let's go back to the strings case. Okay, so I think what we're understanding here is that we're going to need something that is a fairly specific, that's an annotated string. Okay, so let's see. So let's say this is a mess, my notes here, but
I think it's a whole design project to design a higher level string, and I think it's kind of a waste of space just to annotate it. Don't you?
Yeah. And whatever it means. I mean, yes, we've already got this whole mechanism with text element, for example. I mean, like this thing, wherever I had it, this thing here is already its own. I mean, if I go to this and then I do input form of that thing, it looks like that. Right? It's a hierarchical. Now notice this is hierarchical. This is based on the trees framework, basically. It's a hierarchical annotation.
Mm-hmm.
But it could not deal with disjoint annotation.
Right.
And maybe this is the wrong thing for text structure to return. I don't know. I mean, it's been useful. I think once the trees framework is up and running, it may be better to return something of that type, by default at least. So, I mean, your point about a higher level string I mean, it really is annotations. I mean, what else is there going to be about a higher level string other than annotations? It's a string together with certain metadata that may be dependent on where the metadata has certain attributes, like, is it an atomic annotation? Now, by the way, all this stuff about is the annotation atomic, that's going to come up in other places as well. It's going to come up in audio, for example. Right? So like, for example, let's say you've tagged, this is a phoneme, okay? And then you do an audio take, and you get half the phoneme. What should you do? I mean, if that's being used for some machine learning training set, you probably want to say, forget it, it's not a phoneme. Just drop that label. Get what I'm saying?
Okay, so we've just designed a mechanism to deal with inheritance properly for graphs that we're implementing. Because that's one of the biggest requests that were there. So we have properties, and they've been extensively used, all kinds of in-house prototypes, and people out there are doing amazing things with it. So that's been exceedingly useful. Now, because it makes it extensible. Now, what we're going to do is that the set of operations that takes a graph or several graphs and produce a new one, we're and like that you can specify for the particular property you want it to propagate or not. So is it going to be inherited from where it comes?
So if you do a graph union or something, what happens?
Exactly. So that's one of the tricky cases. But the thing is that it gives it gives you override control over these operations. Sometimes you don't want it. You just want the clean thing. But sometimes you want it to sort of, this automatic, or you can say exactly what.
Right. Right. But what you're saying is the calculus of annotations is alive and well and has to be applied in graphs as well as in strings. Because you have the same issue. If you have a subgraph, when you extract that subgraph, but the whole of some subgraph was annotated as being, this is the production line in the factory or something. And then you extract a subgraph that is a disjoint part of that.
Right. But something for subgraph, some people really want the coordinates, the embedding coordinates to be preserved. So that's in fact a property for us. It's not part of the raw graph is just a structural thing. There's nothing to do with embeddings. And
I understand. But what you're saying is that this whole idea of inheritance of annotations,
right? The
annotations calculus or whatever. Okay. So it sounds to me like this is going to turn into the next meeting in this series is, the annotations calculus, and maybe you can present what you've done with graphs so far.
Can I just comment on? So I think the case for graph and string might be slightly different, where by string I also mean image and audio and most things that we have discussed. The problem, so we have talked for the annotation calculus about spatial operation, like taking parts. Mm-hmm. But the problem is that we can change the content of a string or an audio or whatever. So in that case, I am not sure if the annotation calculus should be a different thing than for spatial operations.
Well, wait a minute. So you're saying
you have an annotation at time t, but you change the content at time t.
No, I understand. So does the thing fall off when the content is changed?
Exactly.
Right. So that's a good question. I mean, so that applies to strings as well. Does the annotation?
Yeah, what I'm saying is there should be two types of operations. One, the spatial operations where the content is preserved, but the order of the how much of the content is there changes, and the other one actually changes the content.
Yeah, I get it. But what's different with graphs? I mean, hopefully we're going to have a graph replace one of these days, which can absolutely go and start changing.
Okay, then it's the same. I just wasn't aware of graph replace.
Right, but I mean, graph replace.
No, this isn't complete in the sense that it's so open-ended unless we restrict it, but there's other problems if we restrict it.
Well, I think there's going to wind up being certain criteria, which could be functions, testing functions that determine, is it going to drop off if such and such a thing happens?
Sure.
Right? So, I mean, even the worst case, which reminds me of some kinds of inheritance mechanisms, is, actually modifying the annotation. So in other words, I mean, that seems hopeless to me. So for example, let's take the audio case. If you said, Bill is talking and it starts at this time and it goes for this duration, okay? Then you do a string, an audio take, and you cut off Bill's first throat clearing or whatever. And you still want the Bill annotation to be there, but with a different duration. Get what I'm saying? So in other words, you're monkeying with the actual annotation itself.
Yeah, you're trimming both the audio and the interval, the where of the annotation.
Right. That seems really tough. I mean, the general case of that seems really difficult because it's like you have to then understand. I mean, so one could imagine, look, I mean, this is, okay, so just to start this, the annotation calculus, the first point would be something like, let's see, what would be the right word? Annotation preservation function.
Stephen, before we get too far into this, there's one detail that maybe is relevant only for images, I'm not sure, but is not present for audio and string. Is that audio and string are like one-dimensional, so we can constrain the design to get, for example, starting point and end point of intervals.
Yeah,
for images,
it's 2D, and for graphs, it's no D at all. So
it's just a 2D. It's like is not. Are we forcing that to be a rectangle? That could be a line on an image or a polygon. What if you want to annotate? You're a doctor. You want to annotate a tumor region with
right.
sort of complex mask.
No, but we already have. I mean, we have image masks which are doing that kind of thing. But at least we have an underlying lattice where we can say these pixel values are these voxel values. In the case of a graph, we don't have that at all. We just have a certain set of vertices.
Yeah, true.
But I mean, we have sort of the annotation preservation function, which somehow takes the, criteria for whether to preserve an annotation with an operation. I don't know whether that's one type of thing. Then we've got, let's see, yeah, so that most of these are the annotation preservation question.
I mean, there's also some case where you actually have more than preservation, like in the case of a graph, you have a weighted graph. You add a vertex, you still want the graph to be weighted. The weight is a property, so you need to actually create annotation based on that. So, and it depends on the type of...
I see. So there's also some kind of annotation cloning.
Yeah, Carlo had an introduction to this. I wasn't super sure, but we discussed just briefly. That was like a conforming annotation utility that was aggressively populating empty keys for example, if you create a new audio object and you have a missing. That was more for the shape of the underlying.
Oh,
object.
That seems useful because that would be useful for analysis. I mean, you've got a bunch of sparse annotations and you want to densify them, so to speak, because you want to be able to do essentially a transpose of the annotations and say, rather than having something that says, oh, there's a speaker being specified here, there's an audio type being specified here, to know that there wasn't a speaker in one of those cases. I think we need to wrap this meeting. It will be good if we can continue this soon before we have memory decay, so to speak. This is unfortunately a complicated area, in case we hadn't noticed that before. But I think we're going to have something pretty reasonable here. And I think in the end, we're going to have, some kind of annotated string construct that I suspect we don't want to mess with the actual string head itself. And I don't know whether anybody wants to comment on that immediately. Does anybody know enough to be able to comment on how horrific that would be if we did that? John, you able to make any comment on that?
I mean, I just talk to the people who do this stuff. I don't actually do it. So
fair enough. Okay.
Yeah. So maybe just before we leave, should we add somebody who's more into string
We should next time, yes, we should add somebody who knows about the string implementation. Although maybe we can dispatch that in part of the meeting, because I think a whole lot of it is going to be about this whole annotation calculus. And we're getting there. Very good. Thanks a lot, everybody. Thanks to the live stream folk. Nice comments. And by the way, we are doing another meeting that is being live streamed in about an hour. So if you want to check in on language completeness and consistency meeting, that will start in about an hour. And otherwise, see you all soon.